Hey everyone, Nim here. Today I'll be sharing the process of making my first article of clothing from scratch. As you've already seen from the thumbnail or the title, this is going to be a vest. I got the pattern from one of my mom's old sewing magazines. This particular one is called Neue Mode. It's from October 1993 and the pattern number is 5. So the 5th pattern in the magazine. I've already copied the pattern to baking paper, made a mock-up and adjusted it to fit me, as the original pattern was quite a bit too small. I've also already transferred these changes to the pattern pieces. I'm going to be using this beautiful green rayon twill. I'm following the layout shown in the magazine to prepare the pieces for cutting. Preparing the pieces for cutting took me a while, as I'm making the vest in 2 layers because the fabric is quite thin, and to keep the fabric from moving, as it is quite slippery, I loosely sew every piece together before cutting it. One of the mistakes that I make at this point is not carefully considering my seam allowance. For some reason I had in my mind that 1 centimeter was going to be enough. It was barely. This fabric frayed more than I anticipated. And also, I was quite distracted by considering several different ways of constructing the double-layered vest. I thought about a double welt method, which I learned about from Morgan Donner in her 3 ways to construct a corset video. Another was that I would make the inside layer as the lining, as the original instructions did call for a lining. But in the end, I went with the simplest option for my sake, as to not overcomplicate the construction too much, since this is my first project. By the end of this internal debate, I believe that for the simpler option I wouldn't need that much seam allowance, as I would just zigzag the edges to finish them. This is what I did, but I wish I had taken a bigger seam allowance, as later I wanted to finish the edges by folding them inwards towards each other and sewing them together, which would have given a much neater look on the inside. Another change that I made is that I made the pockets bigger, as the original were so tiny they may as well have been fake pockets. Once I finished cutting out all the pattern pieces, I looked through my mom's sewing supplies for a matching thread. I found one green that looked even a little bit similar, a gold and a light brown that might have been nice as contrasting fashion threads. I made a small sample by hand and decided that the green looked the best and was the safer option for my first time. But as I didn't have very much of this color, I decided that I would use black on all invisible seams and to finish the inside seams. I was finally ready to start on the construction. Each half of the vest has 5 pieces: the front, the in-between the front, the side, the in-between, and the back piece. The instructions began with the side piece and the front in-between piece, which will be the one that has the pocket. Throughout this progress, I worked on both halves simultaneously. The instructions did have these pieces, which were supposed to be for the outside of the double welt pockets, but the pieces were too small for the instructions that I ended up using. The instructions in the magazine were incredibly complicated, so instead I looked up how to do double welt pockets online, and I found Colleen G. Leah and her video Sewing Easy Double Welt Pockets. It's amazing, you should go check her out. So I followed those instructions for the pockets. So the outside piece was a little short, but I still managed to make it work. Obviously, throughout the process, the second half always looked a little bit nicer as I was learning on the go. After finishing the pocket, the next piece, the front piece, is attached. Doing it in this order attaches down one side of the pocket and keeps it in place while also giving it more strength. I did have a little bit of a problem lining these pieces up, as the front in-between piece is at least an inch longer than the front piece. I just ended up middling these pieces and pinning out towards the top and bottom from there and trimming the edges later. I think the next time I will change the order and either attach all pieces and then add the pockets, or add the pockets and then attach the pieces, mainly to make sure that the pocket is lined up better on the outside. At this point I was finishing the inside edges as I went. Remember, all my pieces are double layered, so I have 4 seam allowances coming together instead of just 2. I always trim the 2 middle seam allowances to reduce bulk, and then zigzag the outer 2 together. I did have some difficulty doing this neatly, as I wasn't quite comfortable sewing over the edge of the fabric and it would sometimes bunch up, so there are some loose threads that will need to be trimmed later. As you may be able to see, one of the inner seams is actually much neater, as it is actually a double fold seam. I only managed to do this once because, as I mentioned, I didn't take enough seam allowance to allow me to do this on the fraying material. So only my very first inside seam was folded. The next step is preparing the latch pieces for the back, which is done by sewing a strip with the point, trimming the seam allowance and turning it inside out. I need 2 of these, 1 for each side. After that, these are pinned into place between the back piece and the in-between back piece. The latch is then sewn into place as the pieces are sewn together. Once I had done the first of the 2 halves, I realized I'd made another mistake. When I sized up the original pattern, I didn't think to size up the latches, as they are the same for all of the sizes that were given in the pattern. But since I went several inches bigger, I had to make these longer for them to be able to meet in the middle of the back. So I had to make new ones that were longer, and I had to unpick the one that I had already sewn in place and attach the new one, which I did. It worked out just fine. Next up is attaching the shoulder seam and then finishing the last seam between the front pieces and the back pieces that are not yet attached. At this point I was pretty excited to be making visible progress, so I modeled one of the assembled halves. I finished assembling the second half and connected both with the back middle seam. I then sewed the latches in place, which I had previously just pinned into place after my mistake with the first one, just to make sure that they would meet. I then finished up the last of the inside seams, and I felt ready to take up a majority of the basting stitches. I did leave them in around the unfinished outside edges and the armholes. I ironed on a piece of reinforcement material on the edge where I will later attach the buttons to give the fabric more stability. The obvious next step is to finish the outside edges, which I did by pinning the seam allowance inwards and sewing very close to the outer edge. I did this all around except for the side where the button holes will be. I did originally plan to fold the edges of both the fabrics in towards each other, which would more effectively hide them, but I was having difficulty doing this where the different pieces were meeting. I did already have that one edge pinned, and it looked good, so I did leave it in like that. Once this was done, I sewed a second line of stitches a few millimeters inwards to finish the edge and keep them from fraying. Neither of these visible lines is very good looking, which is why I'm glad that I went with the green thread and not the very visible golden fashion thread. Now, technically only the button and buttonholes are left. We have this container with a collection of buttons, but it's a real mess, so I took a few hours to organize it first. And in the process I found a few buttons that were interesting. A few metal buttons that I really liked but were sadly too heavy for the light fabric. One wooden button that was pretty cool, and also a few metal buttons that were sadly too small. So I went shopping for buttons, and I found these beautifully patterned metal buttons that are not too heavy for the fabric. I had been wearing the almost finished vest at home for a bit, and I realized that the button side was constantly flipping over and showing the inside with the reinforced piece that I had ironed on. So I took some time to add a piece of fabric, much like I had seen on this other vest, that would make the inside look cleaner. I sewed this piece on by hand, but I didn't film much of that. Then I actually attached the buttons and the buttonholes in the front, and very lastly, the button in the back. And that's it. I really love how it turned out, and I'm looking forward to being able to wear it out. Next up, a blouse to go underneath the vest. I hope you like it, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!